Thank you very much. So Forest Owners Association, this may be our first presentation in front of the Health Select Committee, so it's lovely to see you today. We represent the commercial plantation forestry sector. Our members represent 1.2 million of the 1.8 million hectares of commercial forestry in New Zealand and about 70% of the annual harvest. So the short version of that is we're the sustainable timber people. And that's the subsection of the forestry sector that we look after. So the Forest Owners Association supports the Gene Technology Bill and the new Gene Technology Regulator as it adopts a pragmatic, risk-proportionate, evidence-based management approach that will be more enabling for low-risk technologies and allow these to benefit New Zealand while still regulating higher-risk activities. The proposed bill will ensure that the regulatory framework is modernized, future-proofed, and adaptable, and will enable the regulator to take account of potential future changes in technology and approaches. The existing regulations and how they have been applied are outdated and restrictive, to the point that they are a barrier to development and application of modern advances and innovations in genetic technologies to the benefit of New Zealand's environmental, economic, sociocultural, and human health values. The application of genetic technologies, and in particular gene editing, presents many opportunities for the New Zealand forestry sector, including progressing currently stalled research into sterile and low spread risk Douglas fir or other important plantation species to enable this high value timber species to be grown in areas where it is no longer favored due to its wilding risk. And I think there's been a good documentation of the millions of dollars that are spent both the public and the private purse every year in addressing that environmental harm issue. And the access to gene technology could really help us address that in a very efficient and effective way. With that, I will hand to Brendan to talk in a little bit more detail about our recommendations.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. So we have, I guess, three general comments. One, we strongly support and recommend that the bill remain focused on setting a high-level enabling legislative framework that the Gene Tech regulator can work with, and that the detail be captured within the secondary regulations as well. This will ensure that the bill is enabling, future-proof, and that as technology and evidence evolves, any resulting changes can be more efficiently addressed through the regulatory change process rather than the legislative change process. Forest Owners Association also recommends that consideration be given to separating out the food and fibre, and our interest is in forestry where appropriate, as these will likely have quite different risk profiles and concerns, and therefore regulatory and administrative requirements and associated costs that go with those. And this, in our view, would align with the risk proportionate approach that the bill is aiming to deliver and avoid a one-size-fits-all approach that is evident in the current legislation and how it's applied. We would also recommend that consideration be given to the merits of maintaining some form of register and an efficient way of or record of what is currently proposed to be unregulated. Genetic technology applications, as this may provide some insights into the uptake and use of this technology, while also contributing to the evidence base of how this is being applied and its safety. But as noted above, this should be considered as part of the supporting regulations rather than the bill. And those are our general comments. Thank you.
So thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Cam had his hand up.
Yeah, that'd be quick. Yeah, thanks very much for submitting. What sort of benefits do you think could be seen for what currently we have plantation forests covering, or forests covering large areas? What sort of benefits do you think could be imagined to be used to support environmental outcomes in areas downstream of those forestry areas?
Yeah, look, there's probably a bit of a range of opportunities there. So we talked a bit about the wilding risk. While forestry is not the main contributor to that, it certainly is a contributor, and that's something that we would like to have the ability to manage with the species that we grow. Improved pest and disease resistance and resilience is an area we're certainly interested in. I suppose that gives us the ability to deal with climate change and the changing pest loads, disease expressions that might arise, and also the associated treatments that may need to be used for those.
Quickly on, how would you expect genetic technology to help with the wilding pine issue?
Well, there's a sterile variety of Douglas fir that's currently at Scion that's been developed in containment that we could actually work on deploying relatively quickly in the broader scheme of things if it was legal to do so.
Okay.
And obviously that could go through the risk assessment. But I guess with some of the changes that we're talking about, including if you're looking at improving timber properties, one of the first things we would want to do is make those varieties sterile, most likely, because you also don't want to share your awesome genetic developments in that space unless they're licensed. And so if we're looking at sterile trees, in a lot of ways that de-risks some of the concerns you might have about containment or coexistence with foresters that may not want to use those technologies.
Thank you.
Just to clarify on that question, that's a solution for stopping Douglas fir from spreading, but not a solution for existing wilding pines.
Correct.
Yeah.
We're not looking, well, at this stage anyway, we wouldn't be looking at like gene drive technology to make the trees that are extant sterile. I frankly don't even know how that would work. I have a PhD in this stuff.
Yeah.
But what I would say is it would be for any new deployment of species. So we've seen a real decline in the planting of Douglas fir, and several nurseries close over the last few years with the regulation through the National Environmental Standards for Commercial Forestry because of the risk and the risk management around wilding spread. So
it's very useful for us to understand that even gene drive technology, which is still, as Blackman might call it, relatively speculative, it hasn't really been done. It's a theoretical technology. It's not a solution for the existing wilding pine or any other wilding plant species?
Well, I would just caution that we don't know of any applications of it now.
Yeah.
That's not to say, I mean, when you look at the development of CRISPR technology, for instance, people are figuring out new things that you can do with those wonderful little molecular scissors all the time to do some very smart, management of different issues. So I wouldn't want to preclude that some very smart boffin somewhere could come up with a way that we could do that effectively. But at this stage, we don't know of
And with all your knowledge, you can't think of a pathway to doing that.
not at this stage.
Jenny?
Thank you. Mine's a little supplementary on having talked about pine trees. It's been raised with the committee through submission that possibility of cross-industry effects. For example, the example that's given, pollen from a genetically modified pine tree found on an organically grown apple. What are your comments about that in terms of that cross-industry link?
Well, if we're talking about having sterile trees, I would anticipate they wouldn't produce any gametes. So there shouldn't be pollen, I would think. But I guess in terms of that coexistence piece, we are certainly interested in working across the food and fiber sector, and we have a meeting with our colleagues to talk about any kind of risk management that they would want to see in place. And that's something that we would be happy to continue working through across the primary sector. I guess my concern as someone with a science background is there's a lot of misinformation in this space. Like when I say a sterile tree, people get concerned about, well, what if that tree was taken back to its native range and then spread? If it's sterile, that shouldn't be a possibility. I think it's really important that we have a science and evidence-based conversation about the real risks in this space, and then work through those risks in a systematic way. Same with any development around gene drive technology, is I think, do we have applications for that right now? Not to my knowledge, but I think we should take an evidence-based approach to how we work through the possible development and application of those technologies, because climate change and climate adaptation are very unforgiving. And we need to use all the tools in our toolkit to try and address the pressures that we're going to experience at an increasing basis from pest pathogens, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you for being in here today. Yeah, appreciate your time and for your submission.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's interesting hearing about the trees. If you want to chuck yourself in, Laura, because you're an expert in the field, jump on in. And that is the host for the next hour. But I don't mind if Laura jumps in early. Wait.
Hello. How's
Hello.
everyone doing today?
Now your picture has to disappear.
Have you got audio at least?
Yeah. Oh, now we got a picture.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so my comments on this is Douglas fir is not a big tree that makes up the bulk of our industry. It's radiata pine. So it's a very specific use of CRISPR tech gearing towards Douglas fir. I don't know what the market demand is for Douglas fir, but I know that there is a significant market demand for radiata pine, and that's where most of the issues are, is the wildling radiata pine. My counter suggestion to that submission would be to focus gearing towards mixed plantation, so transferring away from radiata pine and embracing more of our native species like totara and kauri, which is going to be a lot more better for our environment, because a lot of our fauna in our ecosystem rely on our native plants. So it would be better off going down that route. And also a lot of our native trees have got fire retardant properties, such as our native honeysuckle. So it's worth going down that route. Got nice thick bark, and you got all that stuff on a lot of our native species. So yeah, it's worth going down the route of native plants over GMO. And also, I don't know what the price difference is between a GMO sapling versus a native sapling. Like, I don't know how much more expensive it is for a person to plant a whole bunch of GMO Douglas pine versus planting a plantation of mixed natives.
Just an answer to that question, Laura, and thanks for coming in. Yes, I agree with you about the use of natives. We've wiped out all of our natives and planted pine in over 200 years, of course.
Yeah.
But it is considerably more expensive to plant a totara seedling, but that's because it hasn't been given that economy of scale that has been gifted to the forestry industry. To the pine industry, so it's starting on a back foot, and they tend not to subsidise anymore. But I'd agree with you. Plant the appropriate tree, and get rid of all your once you've got rid of all your wilding pines, which is going to take from now till
about 50 years or so.
At least. Then perhaps consider sterile varieties, but even then, you're still going to have pollen contaminating other crops. So you are going to have cross contamination. You can't have coexistence. And if you get those traces, it may be substantially equivalent, but it's patently different, and it is traceable.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to point out too that people go, it's wood. We don't use wood in food. Well, actually, we do. We use pulp wood in food, but it's cellulose as a thickener. So
I use wood for serving plates for the waffle trees because they're biodegradable and they meet the Wellington City Council festival weight standards.
yeah, but we actually do use wood pulp in New Zealand as a cellulose thickener. So it's like, okay, a lot of that is probably coming from radiata pine in New Zealand. I haven't looked too deeply into what trees we use for that. But yeah, it is used in food production as well. So that's something we can't overlook. I don't know how much of it we export overseas. I haven't looked into that. But I do know that we do produce it here in New Zealand.
I also see in the comments in the chat there, honey, pollen, bees. Yeah, if you get that into
The
our
list
honey
goes
industry.
on.
Yeah.
And thank you, Michael, for putting that in and all that sort of
Good
thing.
point.
You know, it's great to actually have you part of the audience because you're pumping out facts and I'm learning things because, I mean, you know, gene technology, as I say, it's a minefield to me because it's just not my area of expertise. But I'm learning so much from these people and from people like you, Marty, who have been in the field for longer than I've been alive.
Goodness me. Yeah, and I also see in chat there, I do have totara seedlings. Just they take time, it takes longer, but crikey, like, it's better to wait for 10 years and have a successful outcome, or 10 extra years and have a successful outcome, than to have this potentially unforeseen consequences, which could cripple large areas of our industry and export markets.
And like you said, and like you said, honey production, you know, that's a big industry here in New Zealand, and also carbon credits.
Yeah. Oh,
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook.